The question of how much debt China has is like Schrödinger's cat, a thought experiment in quantum mechanics where a cat inside a sealed box is both alive and dead at the same time until the box is opened and the state is observed. Similarly, China's true debt is both present and hidden at the same time, with different claims and estimates about its size, but the full extent remains unseen. The Ministry of Finance says that the debt is overall moderate and manageable, while Chinese experts claim that what we see is just the tip of the iceberg. International media, on the other hand, say this could be the last straw that breaks the camel's back. But in reality, the true numbers are like Wi-Fi, present but unseen. After all, in a society where even the nation's leader, Xi Jinping, often disappears, debt data is understandably kept under wraps. If the lid were to be lifted, it would shock not just the Chinese people, but also the citizens of countries trading with China. According to public available data from the Chinese government, by 2024, the central government's debt stands at 34.6 trillion yuan, approximately 4.8 trillion US dollars, while local government debt totals 47.5 trillion yuan, approximately 6.6 trillion US dollars. This brings the total debt to about 82 trillion yuan, roughly $11.4 trillion dollars, which is about 61% of China's GDP. In April 2025, the central government added 6.7 trillion yuan, roughly 1 trillion US dollars in new debt, while local governments added 5.2 trillion yuan, approximately 0.7 trillion US dollars. Adding this to the 2024 debt balance, the total debt in China reached almost 94 trillion yuan, 13.1 trillion US dollars. This figure was later revised to 99 trillion yuan, approximately 13.75 trillion US dollars. When compared to the US, where debt is 123% of GDP, Japan's 250%, France's 111%, and Singapore's 168%, China's debt might seem relatively healthy. But this is not the full picture. In fact, it is even smaller than what Chinese experts refer to as the tip of the iceberg. Back in 2011, the Chinese Academy of Social Sciences, CASS, a Chinese state research institute and think tank, established the China National Balance Sheet Research Center, CNBS. By 2015, CASS had integrated over a dozen of its financial and economic think tanks into the National Institute for Finance and Development, NIFD, with CNBS becoming a department under the NIFD. CNBS is the only institution in mainland China that regularly publishes data on the country's national balance sheet. This data has become the authoritative reference for analyzing China's national capabilities, wealth structure, and debt risks. It is recognized and cited by organizations such as the International Monetary Fund, the World Inequality Database, and major international academic journals. When discussing China's macro debt, we begin with this institution's publicly available data. Each quarter, CNBS publishes China's macro debt leverage ratios, breaking down the debt into four major sectors: households, non-financial enterprises, government, and financial sectors. The first three combined represent the real economy. The government sector is further divided into central and local governments, while the financial sector is assessed in terms of both asset and debt leverage ratios. Data available online reveals the government leverage ratio from 2001 to 2024. According to data on general government gross debt for China, the country's debt-to-GDP ratio has been rising year by year. If you want to calculate the exact debt amount in trillions of yuan, simply multiply the average ratio by the GDP. In 2024, China's debt-to-GDP ratio reached 88%. The GDP for 2024 surpassed 130 trillion yuan for the first time, equivalent to approximately 18.8 trillion US dollars. With a debt of 115 trillion yuan, the government's debt load appeared substantial, but another Chinese think tank, Peking University's China National Urban Strategy Institute, published a report in 2023 that presented a different picture. They reported that by 2023, China's total debt had reached an astonishing 350 trillion yuan, about 49 trillion US dollars. According to this institute's analysis, China's government revenue in 2024 was 22 trillion yuan, or about 3 trillion US dollars. At this rate, the government has essentially spent the tax revenue for 2044. You might think that this is the full picture of China's macro debt, but typically, when asking about a country's debt, you're referring to the visible debt in the real economy. So the 350 trillion yuan, roughly 49 trillion US dollar debt in 2023, is merely the tip of the iceberg. China's debt is divided into central and local government debts. With these, both the central and local debts include visible and hidden debts. Why is there hidden debt? Let me explain with an example. Imagine person A borrows from a bank. If A has good credit and collateral, the bank will lend the money. However, if the bank assesses that A has too much debt and is unable to repay, the bank will stop lending. But A still wants to borrow money, so A turns to a friend, B, who agrees to borrow the money on A's behalf, and then A repays B, who in turn repays the bank. Similarly, local governments borrow from the central government. If the central government agrees, it can borrow visible debt. If not, local governments need to find a friend B, typically an investment company that acts as a local government financing vehicle to help borrow money. This creates complexities because it's often unclear whether the borrowed money is used for the intended purpose or diverted elsewhere. If A doesn't repay the loan, B must cover it, and if local governments fail to repay, the city investment company goes bankrupt. This is why the downfall of one entrepreneur can drag down many officials, as these businesses often function like city investment companies. Leading economist Fu Peng has an interesting take on debt. He argues debt isn't debt as long as the people are still there. He recalls a saying from his childhood, "Debt isn't debt as long as people are still around. If a person dies, the debt is gone." Fu points out that many focus on the first part, debt isn't debt, but ignore the second part, as long as the people are still there. Some officials who are not well versed in economics believe that internal debt can be solved by printing money. This misconception has led to the belief that debt can be expanded at will. However, the key restraint is the second part of the saying. If people are no longer here, the debt can't be repaid. In the past, local governments were not allowed to borrow. However, in the past decade, they have been permitted to do so. In 2023, the central government set a debt ceiling for local governments at 42 trillion yuan, which clearly does not meet local expenses. As a result, they had to seek help from friend B, the investment companies. Officially, China's local government debt is acknowledged to be about 14.3 trillion yuan, but in reality, it's much higher. In September 2024, the Chinese government began a series of debt restructuring policies aimed at 12 million yuan. The essence of this restructuring is to convert some hidden debt into visible debt, while delaying repayment dates. The policy involves 3 measures: raising the debt ceiling by 6 trillion yuan to be implemented over 3 years, a 4 trillion yuan special debt for restructuring over 5 years, and a 2 trillion yuan adjustment for housing improvement projects, which don't need to be cleared until before 2028. Why restructure the debt instead of eliminating or repaying it? Why is China willing to spend so much on foreign investments but so frugal when it comes to local government debt? This points to a hidden secret. Is China really home to 1.4 billion people? On Chinese media social platforms like Xiaohongshu and Douyin, many people in rural and urban areas post videos showing the reality that the population figures may not be accurate. Some commentators have analyzed that since the outbreak of the pandemic in 2020, China's death toll has been enormous, but the government has remained tight-lipped. According to Elon Musk's XAI Grok 3, the number of missing people could range from 150 million to 200 million. Leaked reports from the hackers who accessed public security records suggest that the real population may be closer to 900 million, not the 1.4 billion often claimed. According to Fu Peng's theory, if China's population continues to grow and the economy keeps expanding, there should be no worry about debt. Every government loan should correspond to future tax revenue, and residents can contribute to economic growth through labor. Therefore, the debt can be solved in the future. For the government, tax collection capability is the key to managing debt. This is why China has introduced National Social Security and aims to increase tax rates. Both moves are geared towards repaying debt. Fu Peng categorizes debt into external and internal debt, but the real question is, where does the government collect taxes from? It collects both from citizens and from overseas. No matter the type of debt, it all comes down to the government's ability to control its tax collection power. If the 300 trillion yuan debt is just the tip of the iceberg, then it's easier to understand China's actions amid an economic downturn and declining population. This explains why Xi Jinping is eager to hold grand parades and engage in internal purges within the Chinese Communist Party and its military. In fact, he needs to arm the military to go overseas to collect taxes and recover money from corrupt officials. At this point, we can't overlook the 4 pillars of the CCP rule: gun barrels, knives, pens, and wallets. In the CCP's power structure, the gun barrels represent the military for external deterrence. The knives refer to the internal surveillance and control system that monitors high-ranking officials. The pens are responsible for reframing dictatorial policies as positive narratives, and the wallet is the machine that funds the privileged elite. So, how did China's massive debt accumulate? It's all tied to one man, Xi Jinping. Since Xi took power, his ambitions to restore imperial rule have never wavered. Commentators have analyzed why Xi tilted towards Russia, suggesting that he envies Vladimir Putin. After all, Putin served as both prime minister and president, and now he's back as president. The CCP even amended the constitution to remove presidential term limits, allowing Xi to remain in power indefinitely, to continue as long as he wants. Those who support Xi's imperial ambitions may genuinely believe in the ideal of a restored monarchy. This isn't necessarily due to ignorance or foolishness, but could be seen as self-interested attempts to gain approval, a concept rooted in selfish behavior that seeks validation. It may sound philosophical, but it's a common human tendency. When people realize they can gain tremendous wealth by shamelessly flattering those in power, many might be tempted. Xi's ascent to power has resulted in those around him becoming his subordinates, vying for his favor. As in any palace intrigue, these subordinates may try to maximize their own benefits by pleasing their master. Xi Jinping has a reputation for grandiose ideas and boasting, and his officials, eager to gain favor, often go along with whatever he suggests. Take, for example, the surplus in China's AI industry. On July 14th, China held its Central Urban Work Conference for the first time in 10 years. Afterwards, the CCP state media, People's Daily, published an article in which Xi candidly criticized local governments for blindly rushing into projects in new energy and artificial intelligence. He asked the participants, when launching projects, we often hear about a few things: AI, big data, and new energy vehicles. Does every province need to develop these industries? This casual question not only revealed the serious issue of homogenized development in emerging industries across China, but also highlighted the flaws in the CCP's governance system. The big government, big market model has, while driving economic growth, also planted the seeds for overcapacity. Why did this homogenization happen? Because officials in China's 32 provinces and regions are eager to gain Xi's approval and secure promotions. To please him, they pursue the same projects Xi favors, like AI and new energy vehicles. But what happens when the money runs out? The government has to borrow. This is how local debt came to be. Local governments borrowing money to curry favor with Xi, the emperor. While electric vehicles are a global trend and technologies like DeepSeek have been booming, how many electric vehicle companies in China have collapsed due to excessive competition? The same pattern can be seen in the data center industry. According to Li Gengguo, director of the Shanghai Supercomputing Center, local data center projects were plagued by homogeneous competition, and many early centers were simply filled with outdated servers. With the rise of cloud computing, virtual servers are now the norm, leaving many of the original servers unused. Economist Fu Peng says that it's fine as long as borrowing brings returns. The problem arises when most borrowed funds are wasted on unproductive projects. He also emphasizes that the core issue lies in the government's ability to collect taxes. If tax revenue doesn't increase, the government is forced to reach beyond its borders to collect funds. Instead of waging war, the CCP has resorted to more covert methods to extract money from abroad. According to journalist Wang Jizhou, the Golden Triangle area at the border of Myanmar, Thailand, and Laos is a hotbed for illicit activities, like scams, prostitution, gambling, drug trafficking, and organ trade. The real mastermind behind these operations was Liu Yuejin, a former senior police officer and China's first counterterrorism commissioner. Liu controlled the criminal industry through his associate Zhao Wei. Liu Yuejin, who served as an assistant to the Minister of Public Security and Deputy Director of the National Narcotics Control Committee, oversaw this network from 2015. Zhao Wei, a representative of the CCP's Public Security Ministry, took control of Myanmar's criminal industry in 2001, operating a casino named Blue Shield Entertainment, a reference to the Public Security Ministry's emblem. In 2005, Zhao Wei moved his operations to Laos after a scandal in Myanmar, where a casino brawl led to the death of a senior official's son. On September 8th, the U.S. Treasury Department imposed sanctions on large-scale fraud networks in Southeast Asia, which allegedly used forced labor and violence to steal billions of dollars from Americans. According to social media figure Zhou Mingfeng, the online fraud centers in northern Myanmar are controlled by China's National Security Agency. She Zhijiang, who was arrested by the Thai government, previously admitted in front of the media that he was a national security officer, and around $300 million was seized at the time of his arrest. Another national security officer, Guo Huaping, who was exposed by She, was involved in fraud activities in Cambodia. There, $1 billion in assets were seized upon her arrest. Zhou Mingfeng further revealed that the fraud centers have dedicated areas targeting developed countries such as the US, European countries, and Japan. In order to repay debts, Xi Jinping has another tactic, the corruption-driven fill-the-gap strategy, arresting officials and pursuing embezzled funds. After all, many new projects turn into excuses for embezzlement, where the money doesn't reach production lines but lands in officials' pockets first. According to an article by Wang Yuchun in the Epoch Times, corruption within the CCP is rampant. For example, Li Jinping, former secretary of the Party Working Committee of Hohhot Economic and Technological Development Zone, embezzled over 30 billion yuan. Lai Xiaoming, former chairman of China Huarong Asset Management, received bribes totaling 1.8 billion yuan, around $2.5 billion. He embezzled another 25 million yuan, approximately $3.5 million. Former chairman of Hongfeng Bank, Cai Guohua, embezzled 1.2 billion RMB. However, even with the revelations of such enormous sums, the total debt of 350 trillion yuan is still far from being addressed. To fill the debt gap, the central government continues to strengthen anti-corruption measures. The Central Commission for Discipline Inspection reports that under Xi's leadership, about 4.7 million officials have been investigated. Some analysts, like journalist Yuan Hongbing, estimate that the figure could be as high as 7 million. However, the scale of the funds seized and how they're being used remains undisclosed. Xi Jinping's lack of term limits has essentially made him an emperor. Officials who believe their corruption will benefit them often end up serving as financial guardians for the power structure, overseeing the wealth accumulated by those in power. Xi's regime relies on the military, surveillance system, propaganda, and the wealth machine to fund the elite. As this system heads towards collapse, the CCP's end is inevitable, and Xi's imperial dream will soon be shattered.